Okay, you heard that, recording in progress.
Yeah, I got it.
Good. Okay. Good morning. This is Talking Smart Conversations with colleagues in philosophy and education from around the world. I'm Mort Morehouse, and we're talking today to Roger Sutcliffe. And he read philosophy at Oxford and taught at the junior school. I guess we would call it in the United States a junior high school or a high school.
Junior or elementary to start, and then
Okay,
junior
okay,
high. Yeah.
yes, okay. And then he also took joined the math department at Christ Hospital School in Horsham, and took another degree in maths from Open University. And then he studied privately with Matt Lipman and with Edward Bono, and also as a Rogerian counselor. I kind of noticed that in one of your TED talks. Could kind of tell it had a Rogerian feel to it. So
yeah.
and anyway, he was also one of the founders of SAFI, the European Philosophy for Children Society, and was also for a short time, a couple of years, I guess, maybe 6 years or 7 years, the president of ICPIC, the International Council for Philosophy for Children. That's probably, and he's currently the president of Dialogue Works, and has been working on easy for you to say, philosophical teaching and learning, and thinking moves from A to Z, and so that's kind of the full introduction, I think. Probably 1,000 things other that you've been involved in as well, but okay.
Well, those are the main ones.
Yeah, and it was just interesting. I was, of course, reviewing again your article in Analytic Teaching on philosophical teaching and learning, and that's kind of where we're going to, I guess, start talking about the ideas of philosophical teaching and learning as a sort of a hyphenated word, and also values and valuing as kind of the larger issues that surround the Thinking Moves project. Is that a fair way to?
Yeah, absolutely. We can go in all of those directions, although they do, in a sense, come together under the headline of philosophical teaching and learning.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think it would be easier if we just call it PTL now.
Oh, okay.
That's how I'm promoting it. But seriously, there is a value in talking about teaching and learning hyphenated, because in my opinion, many of the skills that one wants to develop as a teacher are the very same skills that you want the learners to develop.
Yes.
Besides that, linguistically, it's interesting that in some languages, teaching, the word for teaching is the same as the word for learning.
So fantastical helper. Good Friday.
Sorry, my computer does that.
Okay, that's all right. For me, it was, I've been a teacher all my life. I hope to say I've been a learner all my life. And it was basically after nearly 20 years in the P4C world that I realized that P4C, Philosophy for Children, had a great gift to offer education more broadly. People might think of it as just a boxed in, yes, the kids are doing philosophy, how nice. And actually, what I feel, and I dare say you agree with me, is that a teacher who does philosophy with children becomes a better teacher as a result, and can begin to teach anything in a more philosophical way. But maybe we should explore what that could be. What do you think?
Oh, yes, I agree. I think so. And as we talk through this, I probably will be interjecting some things about my own education as a teacher and kind of how that fits in with your larger project. So,
well, please do more, please do. So look, obviously, philosophical inquiry is a speciality in itself. That's what we do in P4C. And most people would understand that to mean inquiry into philosophical ideas, ways of thinking. But for me, the process of philosophical inquiry and thinking is very much one of conceptual inquiry. You're trying to understand, obviously, big ideas in philosophy, but essentially there are big ideas in every subject. And I don't just mean subject-specific ideas. So like the concept of cause, which is a deeply philosophical one, applies in science, it applies in history, it applies, you could argue, even in sports. You don't, of course, want footballers to be analysing the concept of cause too much, but most teaching clearly is in words. I think that's fair to say. You know, we demonstrate some things, footballers demonstrate, and so on. But a coach will largely communicate in words. And it's very important that they are clear in their thinking and that the complexity of what they're thinking, which must be considerable if they're established and respected coaches, is expressed in a way that the students can understand. And therefore the students themselves need to be better thinkers to, if you like, not just grasp the concepts, but work with them. So that's my contention, that there's inquiry and conceptual development in every subject, philosophical conceptual inquiry in every subject. And then, sorry, I mustn't turn this into a lecture, but the other strands of philosophical thinking, teaching and learning are just as important. So there's a strand of dialogue, developing good dialogue between not just teachers and students, but students and students, because it's often through dialogue, through talking about what we're trying to learn, that we actually understand it better. And I guess, can I throw that back to you? Your experience as a teacher, isn't it like when you've got to teach something, you actually really have to master it?
Yes. There was when I first started teaching at Viterbo, there was a person, one of the teachers in physics, was awarded the Teacher of the Year. When he gave his speech at the end of the year after he won that award, he opened by saying, he said, when I first taught physics at the university level, I was learning how to do it. And he says, and then I taught it again, and then I taught it again, and then I taught it, and finally I learned what I was teaching about, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's that whole interesting dynamic, that the more we can develop the depth of our own thinking that to convey to others, the more likely we are to learn ourselves from our own reflections and our own hearing ourselves talking out loud.
Yeah. There's a lovely quotation by Robert Fisher, who was very significant in the development of UK philosophy for children. I'm not sure actually if it's an actual quote from a 9-year-old, but it's presented as, how do I know what I think till I hear what I say? And it's actually a beautiful way of pointing how important it is to formulate our ideas clearly in words. But I want to pick up on something else that you just said, Mort, which is so important, and that is reflection. This is very Deweyan, of course, who in my view is misrepresented when the slogan goes out, learning through doing. I think that Dewey was saying we learn through reflecting on doing. So we do something, but it's only when we reflect on it that we learn what we did right, what we did wrong, how we can improve it, and so on. Very much what your physics teacher was doing himself.
Exactly.
So that reflection is another of the 6 strands of philosophical teaching and learning. Part of my thesis is that teaching in the modern world is so pressurized, there's so much content to get through and so on, that we as teachers, and I include myself, simply don't give enough time to the students to reflect on what they're learning, and not just say, right, well, we'll have 5 minutes reflection time. We need to give the students tools for reflection. And that's perhaps part of the value of the thinking moves scheme that I've developed. I mean, it goes much wider than this, but there are particular moves, or I call them thinking grooves, which is a sequence of moves that actually, when properly implemented and regularly practiced, in my opinion, but I can't prove this because it's not practiced enough, can raise the quality of reflection. So the first move for reflection is to think back. That's the B in the A to Z or A to Z. So think back, and then you can put in a number of alternative moves. So one of them might be picture, and this will appeal to your visual learner. Think back to the presentation or to your reading. No doubt there's images in it, and just picture some of the things that you've come across, and then try to make sense of those in the context of the topic. So there's back and picture. There's back and keyword, particularly relevant for text, but can also be used for, say, a video presentation. So keywording, in my view, if there's one tool out of the toolbox of the A to Z that I would have valued so much as a young teacher, it would be the tool of keywording, which we turn into a verb. And it's basically that ability to listen to something or to read something and identify the really most important words in the text. And then we often turn that into a groove. So keyword goes with headline. That's the H in the A to Z. So headline is like summarize. So you've identified, if you like, the keywords. Now capture the key message and put it into a headline. Now, if you can train your students, I say you, I mean me, I mean us as teachers, if we can train our students from an early age to listen, L is the listen look in the sequence of A to Z, to listen for keywords. They're going to listen harder, they're going to apply their intellect more effectively, and they're almost certainly going to learn better. So there's back and keyword. Well, I could go on more. This is, it really excites me.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, putting things together. One of the interviews that I hope is coming up was with Barbara Weber, and she's just written a paper with a colleague about exploring Heidegger's what it means to think, and a part of that is the deep thinking, the reflection, and staying with the topic. And so my sense is that there are 2 interesting elements in what you're talking about with this whole reflection process. One is it brings things to the fore, but it also sort of plants the seeds for deeper thinking that doesn't necessarily happen in the moment, but as we are allowed to reflect, that allows us to explore our own thoughts more deeply.
Absolutely. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on what I've just said, because my absolute favorite thinking groove is BKCE. Now, those who don't know the moves as well as I do won't know what I'm talking about here, but I've just mentioned back, and K is keyword. So the next 2 in this sequence are connect. So you might say, well, okay, so I've listened and I've or looked, read, and these are the key words that I've come up with, or that we as a group say, yeah, those are the key words of the presentation. And then the teacher can invite the students to look at them and connect any 2 or 3. Now, they'll all be intimately connected, of course, but some will be more obviously connected. So, and you could do this in pairs. So the students will review, reflect on what they've seen and say, well, that connects with that, doesn't it? Okay, but the real punch line, that's not quite the right word, but the coup de grace here is to say to the students, fine, well, A connects to B, now explain the connection.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's the E in the sequence. And of course, if a student has to, top of the head, explain a connection, a conceptual connection, then they're going to have to find in their own words to recreate that connection in their own words. And that's ultimately owning their learning rather than parroting what someone else has said or whatever. And so that, I mean, to me, that's just a wonderful sequence that can be used for reflection. Back, keyword, connect, and explain.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
Good. Yeah, you go.
No, that really makes a lot of sense. And again, just to provide a more context, at least for me, this is really interesting about that process, because some of these issues were coming to the fore when I was doing teacher education stuff. I mean, you refer back to a labor movement in the paper when some of these things, we had the new curriculum that sort of came out in math and then eventually in social studies that evolved from Sputnik and all the rest of those things.
Yeah.
And that included Jerry Bruner and Ann L. Brown and all kinds of other people. And, I think particularly of Bruner's Man, of course, a Study, which was a hands-on exploration of the Alaskan culture. So anyway, that's all of those pieces sort of were beginning to be packaged in those days, and then I think we lost track of a lot of that stuff that happened in the late 60s and early 70s, at least in the United States, and those got pushed to the background, and we ended up with No Child Left Behind and testing. So
much the same happened in the UK, to be fair, and I think probably that is a phenomenon across the world, sadly. I mean, we go a bit broad here, of course, now then. So there's core knowledge and the knowledge campaign. And look, why would anyone who's a thoughtful person be against teaching children knowledge and facts? That, they obviously need to know stuff. But the people who propose that seem to think that you can just absorb knowledge without thinking about it, that you don't need to, well, no, I'm being unfair. Of course, they realize that you need to be creative and critical in your thinking. But so often it's presented as a dichotomy. You either learn facts or you think. No, clearly you think about facts. You think about values as well. So maybe now is the time for me to just say a few more words about the values dimension of PTL. And just to review now, we've covered so far inquiry, conceptual development, I call it concept construction. We've talked about dialogue, dialogic teaching and learning. That's a thing in the UK, probably elsewhere. We've talked about reflection. So that's 4 out of the 6. So the other 2, just for information, are reasoning and what I call virtues valuing. Now, I'll just deal briefly with reasoning. If you're going to construct concepts that are well-formed and well-informed, then actually reasoning is a vital part of that process. And indeed, all teaching should involve reasoning more or less. And I'm not talking here about teaching formal reasoning. I'm talking about making sure that in your classroom, you as a teacher give reasons for your beliefs, for what you're teaching, that you invite the students to reason out, not just in maths, but in various subjects, what they think and why they think it, so justifying. So there's that sort of reasoning. And as I say, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that these 6 strands, several of which, 4 of which actually Anne Sharp was very clear about when she talked about the community of inquiry, I call them interweaving strands. Because actually, in effect, you can't construct concepts without reasoning. And reasoning is often best done in dialogic form. And of course, inquiry itself is best done dialogically as well as individually. So they're interweaving strands. So I've now explained 5 of them, reasoning being the 5th. But how does virtues valuing fit in? Do you mind if I just elaborate that a moment?
No, please do. Yes.
Okay. So it's interesting that the common language around this area is very much about values rather than virtues. And there are reasons for that. Some of them are historical, socio-cultural. So I think it's fair to say in England, UK, maybe the English-speaking world in general, the word virtue isn't unequivocally positive. I mean, we have the phrase virtue signaling for a start. So that immediately suggests that a lot of virtues are like just for performance and da-da-da. And then in the UK, at least, there's the whole thing around Victorian virtues like chastity and goodness knows. So, okay, but my contention is that, firstly, virtues are undervalued because they're less talked about, or they're talked about in a derogatory fashion in some way. But secondly, that actually they are the most important of values. They are values, of course. We value patience, we value determination, we value courage, we value curiosity. All of these virtues, some of them intellectual, some of them more social, moral, if you like, we do value them, but we also value things like, oh, I don't know, let's say democracy, although that's itself become a little bit tainted in recent times, I think. But we value peace, we value harmony. But the thing is that those are like public, if you like, social values out there. You can see them often in schools. They talk about excellence as a value.
Yes.
But it's something that you achieve out there. It doesn't come from within. Whereas actually, if you're going to achieve harmony, you need peaceable people. You need people who are prepared to compromise, tolerant, and so on. So effectively, my contention is that no values can be properly attained unless we attend to the personal virtues that actually will lead to those desirable outcomes. And that's why we should value virtues above everything.
Yes.
The last thing to say in this context, because we're talking about philosophical teaching and learning, is that actually those virtues, and I've listed some of them, but they're manifold, are absolutely essential for good teaching and learning. If you don't have attentive students, attentiveness is a virtue, you're not going to teach them much, or they're not going to learn much. If you don't have persistent students, the latest buzzword for a few years in the UK is resilient, you know, students who don't give up and so on. Well, there's any number of such virtues, and ultimately I would argue that I don't think we should be testing for virtues, but if you could put hand on heart at the end of a school education, a college education, and say, this student has grown as a person, these are their virtues, that would be worth 100 times, or well, 10 times. We can't quantify it. This person has got an A grade in social studies, or this person has got a top first-class degree in geography, or whatever. Yeah. Great, that's fine, and we value it, but it really isn't what's important in education.
Yeah, well, we've seen in the United States where those things get played out, I suppose, as in Carol Dweck's work,
Sure.
and what's her name now? I'm trying to think. The author of Grit.
Yes. Well, I know the author, the name of the writer was Paul Tow, I think, but he was based on, is it Barbara Duckworth?
Duckworth, it's Duckworth, yes,
yes, I forget it. I don't know if it's Barbara. Yeah, look, and that's important stuff.
Yes.
But look, to give you a sort of not superficial critique, but a top of the head critique. Not all of that stuff, but a lot of that stuff is very capitalist based.
Oh, yes.
It's very materialist based, how to succeed in life, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's not deeply philosophical in the sense of what sort of person do I want to become? What sort of people do we want? What sort of society do we want? It just misses out a lot of that really deep philosophy.
I would say that's really true of Duckworth in particular. I mean, if you look at her biography, I mean, that's her whole raison d'etre, as they say, because that's,
I believe,
because I mean, she came up through the very, very capitalist thing. I mean, she started her work after graduating first in her class someplace, and then got into this big consulting firm and doing all that kind of stuff. And
I can believe.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think Carol Dweck is a little less kind of capitalistic, because I think it's a slightly broader view of that. But, go ahead.
No, well, I would agree with that. I think that her concept is one of the lasting impacts in education. There's been a lot of interest in it. It's not wishy-washy, I would say, but it is very general, of course. It's like, I can do this, I can be that, I got to believe. So about self-belief, and I approve of that. But again, you know, in the end, we've got to say, well, you know, what sort of growth do you want here? And educational growth, as I'm trying to indicate, is way more than just being able to succeed at the academic level.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't, you know, that's a rather unarticulated area, and I probably the most representative of those kind of values is embedded in the philosophy of children, community of inquiry stuff, because that is toward the development of the whole person in a way that most of those others are not. Although there's another person that I kind of like that is done, that is implicitly about more holistic development, and I think Noel Entwistle's work on deep and surface learning. Do you know, from the University of Edinburgh?
No, I can't say I do, and I obviously should.
Well, yeah, and he distinguishes between deep and surface learning, and mostly working with university students, but I think it's a very a rich understanding of what it means to learn, and gets at some of those virtues are so both implicitly and explicitly developed in what he considers to be deep learning.
Yeah. I think I've got echoes of that. There was a well-known educationalist in the UK in New Labour's period, late 90s, early 2000s, called David Hargreaves, and he was very much into, you know, that idea of deep learning. And I think if I can elaborate, sorry, you go.
I'm sorry, reading your paper, I came across his name, and I said, just like you, I've got to look that up now. And I haven't
yeah.
looked it up yet, so.
Yeah, very much so. But I think it's an idea worth exploring in its own right, and here and now, because at one level it can be regarded as a very cognitive thing. You know, it's just excellent cognition. So, you know, I'm not dealing with the surface of matters. I really understand this subject now, and great, that's what we want our students to do. But when we think about what understanding a subject is, we're dealing with more than just words. This comes again to the idea of concept construction. Any sort of understanding at the academic level, well, not any, but most, is expressed, as I say, in words. Words are concepts. How do we make sense of concepts? Even from an early stage, we do it but in two ways, basically, it seems to me. One is that we have some experience to bring to bear that enables us to say, oh, yes, I get that now. Yeah. It may be just at a physical material level. I can distinguish between a cow and a horse or something, you know, so I've got a concept of a cow and I've got a concept of a horse, and this has got horns, so it's not a horse, it's a cow, and that sort of thing. Okay. But now, ultimately, almost all human understandings need to be based in the real world. So there must, in theory at least, be a physical material link between our concepts and what they're about, if you like. Yeah. And so that's an important notion of connection between a word and reality, if you like. But there's also, of course, and this is happening, I suppose, increasingly in the academic world, words get connected and connected and connected with each other. I suppose essentially this is what chatbot's all about, and so on, this large language model. So you just get repetitions of phrases, words, and so on, and they're all somehow connected. And somehow this amazing computer brings it together into some sort of coherent sense. Remarkable. But we don't actually believe that it understands what it's talking about, not in the sense that human beings do. Okay. And so that ability to connect one concept with another, and essentially that's what philosophy for children does so well, better than almost any enterprise in the classroom, is, well, I've never thought about that before. Yes, I can see that love connects with care, or I can see that this concept connects with that, and we make a conceptual connection. And now I'm almost losing my thread here, but what I'm saying is that the simple move that actually makes for not just learning, but deep learning is the move of connect, where we're both connecting words with our experience, if you like, our reality, and also connecting one word with another, collectively expressing our understanding of the world at large.
Yes, yes. Well, and I think those are related to those kind of aha moments in our education. And I've reflected on this quite a bit because, well, you know, as a person gets into their 80s, they have time to think about something. But anyway, I have these vivid memories of two things that are closely related to this topic from my own experience. One was, and I spent a semester, which is impossible these days, but I spent a semester as what we called back in the 60s a non-student. I hung out on the university campus and drank beer and read philosophy and novels.
Yeah.
Went to classes when I wanted to, and because of instructors allowed me to come in the class, you know. But that was a very fruitful time.
Yeah.
And I say that, and one of the amazing things is we, among other things, read Nikos Kazantzakis' Zorba the Greek. And I discovered, in quotes, I discovered the meaning of Zorba the Greek, that this was a conflict between Dionysian and Apollo values. And for me, the amazing thing was I was never taught that. I figured it out.
Yeah.
You know, and I figured it out in conversation, in casual conversation, and that was it. And I characterized it even back then as when I discovered I had a mind. You know.
Yes.
And let me just do one other quick one because it's close to my heart. I remember this in a sociology class. One of the older students, non-traditional students, we call them, which meant he was about 4 or 5 years older than the rest of us. But anyway, that was an oddity back then. And he asked a question in a sociology class, citing of the instructor, citing another sociologist. And I was just struck in the moment that I had never heard, particularly a student, thinking with another person's thought.
Yeah.
And that opened up a world of thinking for me, because it was okay, yes, I can have my own thoughts, but I can have my own thoughts that have been filtered through somebody else's,
Yeah.
and that makes my thoughts, and both the wonderful, what made it a valuable experience was the instructor was open to taking that kind of criticism. I mean, he didn't get upset. How dare you, this is not a class sort of thing, as often happens. And so he just integrated that and tried to himself think through that answer to that question.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are just, but I think that's all related to the kind of stuff that you're trying to work with. And I guess one of I'll raise a strange question here. One of the things that I wonder about, and that is, where's the place for student struggle? When we're developing all these little mini skills, which I 100% support, but I just sometimes question in the back of my mind, where's the opportunity to discover some of those things myself, and well, I don't know. It seems there's a balancing act about how much we lead and how much we allow to emerge.
Yes. Okay. Well, I've got two answers to that from within the thinking moves.
All right.
But also, I think it relates to the virtues valuing again. So let me just see if I can hold all those thoughts together.
Yes.
Two moves in the A to Z that are particularly pertinent to student independence, autonomy, if you like, are question, and effectively your what do you call a non-traditional student,
right,
was raising a question, which of course we do encourage students to do, but often they're questions of information we want them to ask in order to elaborate their understanding at an informational factual level. But your student was going beyond that and exercising a critical faculty, critical questioning, if you like. But I think that not just P4C just develop questioning of a philosophical kind. It actually gives students permission to question in a very general way, and to seek both information and what I call insight. And insight is a bit more like understanding, but it's not the same. And so questioning would be an important move. And incidentally, for all of the moves, there are equivalent mindsets. Now, I'm not talking about Carol Dweck's growth mindset. I'm talking more like habits of mind, Costa's habits of mind sort of thing, or I just call them intellectual virtues. So if you're talking question, then the virtue, if you become good at questioning, is curiosity. Or you could say inquisitiveness. Just to give you a couple of other examples, I talked a lot about thinking back earlier on. If you're good at thinking back, you're a reflective person. That's the sort of direction of travel. So, well, I won't elaborate on that too much, but essentially, if you've got someone who's asking good questions, then that's a road to their own empowerment and their own betterment as a learner. The other move that's really important here is test. That's the T, of course, in the sequence. So to test is to doubt or to check. And again, that's what your student was doing. You were saying, well, you're saying this, but I'm not so sure because so-and-so is saying this. So yeah, could we check on that? So I'm not saying that's the whole picture, but those two moves, practiced again, encouraged, practiced, and developed, will turn into real mindsets. So the mindset that goes with tests, of course, is skeptical. You know, we want students who are actually skeptical in the end, not cynical, but able to say, well, I'm not so sure about that. Let me just test that. So I hope that partly answers your question.
Oh, yes, yes.
It leads into this idea of virtues valuing, though, because, you know, I want my students to raise questions. I want my students to test, not just what I say, but what each other says, test what they read in the text, and so on. So I want them to be curious and skeptical. Those are two virtues particularly applicable to students, but of course you'd also want your teachers to be evidencing, modeling curiosity, modeling a certain amount of skepticism themselves. But the move and the mindset that the teacher in the example you quoted demonstrated was just as important, which is open-mindedness. Oh, yeah. Now, teachers will be fond of saying, well, we want our students to be open-minded, but how open-minded are they? And an answer to that question, at least at the school level, is actually force of circumstances, not really. They're not really very interested in eliciting questions from the students because they've got so much to teach, and there's a syllabus and there's a test at the end. So sorry, no time for your questions. And what's more, I'm the master of my topic, so I'm going to do this my way, and don't you challenge it. Now, okay, that sounds a little over the top and authoritarian, but I'm saying this isn't actually necessarily the default position of teachers. They would love to have more time to be open-minded, to be open in a more general sense. And it is just a system that binds them in and habituates them to being less good than they could be, and certainly less philosophical. So that's my project, is to say, contrary to the direction of much travel, we desperately need teachers to be more philosophical. And I think I've just got one more important point to make, if I may. Please. But okay, well, that is that the last thing I want to convey is the notion that there are philosophical teachers and the rest of them are non-philosophical. I actually believe that all teachers are philosophical to some extent, partly because they go into the profession with a value system, which is like, knowledge is good. I want my students to know about the world through the lens that I teach, whether it be science or music or whatever. And by and large, I think teachers want to do this for the betterment of the children. So they want the children to have what in old-fashioned language was called the good life, or better life. And nowadays, so often we talk about well-being. An irony of this is that a lot of what goes on in schools is actually counter to the well-being of both the students and the teachers. But I'm going off on one again there. So my main point is this, that even in the process of teaching, teachers are philosophical because they're trying to express understanding and develop understanding, which I regard as the philosophical project. Understanding and appreciation, which is valuation. How are we to value the world? Okay, the question then isn't, are you philosophical or are you not philosophical? The question is, how philosophical are you? And could you be more philosophical? And the answer to that unequivocally is we could all be more and better philosophical teachers. And the six-strand scheme is, if you like, a pathway or a guideline towards that. So that's my last point, and I think it's worthwhile one to make.
No, I agree, and unfortunately, I think it's probably time to end because it's just close to 45 minutes.
Yeah,
and which is a wonderful time, and this has been a very, very enjoyable conversation. And so,
well, thanks for sharing it with me, Mort, and good luck to you. You're going strong, and long may that continue.
Thank you. And now I think I will see if I can stay on the air while I do this. I'm gonna, what is this? Stop